This is the Unearthing Art Podcast with Michele Luminato and Bec Lee, where we dig into the messy reality of making art that matters, raw and real conversations about being an artist, navigating the creative process, and expressing our honest and sometimes weird selves.
Michele, something that's been on my mind that came up in our first episode of the year was talking about low-hanging fruit. We got into a little bit around the art market and how it's changed a little bit from the previous couple of years, and that what might have been easy sales in the art market previously have become a little bit more difficult as the market's tightened up. And so in relation to this idea of low-hanging fruit, which, just to be really clear about it, I'm pretty sure it's a common terminology, but the idea that at the start of the season and, there might be lots of apples just within shoulder height that you can pluck off really easily, and then as time goes on, as you clear that kind of lower layer, you're like, now I need to reach up a little higher, I need to do a little bit more to get to the fruit, and then at some point you're getting ladders out. Now you're climbing and it takes longer to get to each one. And, there might even be some stuff right at the top of the trees that you're like, is it worth my effort to go all the way up there to get just one more apple? I think that whole analogy works on lots of levels about all sorts of stuff to do with making art and our art business. So I wanted to pick it apart a little bit.
I love it. That's a great analogy and such a great visual way of what it really is like too as an artist, because when you first start off and you're painting and you're making paintings and you're pricing to really kind of attract that low-hanging fruit, what I would consider like more easy, what looks easy, but it's not a place that has a lot of sustainability once all that low-hanging fruit has been picked. And I think that's not only from, what your offer is to that market, in terms of that, as well as what you can continue to produce.
Because this applies, we did talk about it in terms of the market, but at the time it really struck me how this applies to the art process itself. Because when, I'll talk for myself, when I started painting, I had probably been thinking about it for years. I mean, I'd been playing a little bit. Like when I decided I was going to paint seriously and I was going to create a collection that I was going to put up for sale. That's probably a more accurate description of what I'm talking about. I had been playing and taking, fun courses, and I was kind of bubbling with enthusiasm and ideas. There was a lot of low-hanging fruit in my artistic orchard at that point in time. There was always ups and downs to that process, but looking back now, there are a lot of ideas that I had built up that I was ready to get out. It strikes me in terms of the writing world when, people talk about writing their first novel or the first novel that gets published. They've spent their whole lives as a writer thinking about this plot, these characters. They've got a lot of investment in those ideas, and so there's a lot of material there. The novel comes out, it's a great success, and then the publisher's like, okay, now we want another one. So whereas the development process for that first novel might have been 10 years of thinking, dreaming, your first exhibition as an artist, thinking, dreaming, and then they're like, that was great, give us another one. Now you've got 6 months. That is not, you've taken all the low-hanging fruit, you've put it into that first big expression, that first big kind of success, and now you're like, oh, I've got to now work out how to generate something that's the next level.
Yeah, 100%. And I do think the technical skills as an artist when you're first starting, that low-hanging fruit, in terms of what is sellable, like there may not be as many technical skills required as well.
Definitely.
And then as you start developing more technical skills, then you have more questions, on how to execute things. I know for my own self, some of the ideas I had that I wanted to execute, I just couldn't. I could not literally do them because of the skills the skills weren't there, even though the vision was there. And I think a lot of people feel that frustration. A lot of artists probably have experienced that themselves, where they, might like, oh, I want to do this and I do this. And then all of a sudden this other thing comes out and you're like, well, that's not what I wanted it to look like. So your vision is there, your taste is there, but your ability to execute on that isn't always there, and so that's where I think then you've got to get the ladders out and you got to climb a few steps and you got to dig a little bit deeper. And
that can be a bit of a shock, can't it?
Yeah, I think it is.
If that first experience you had of walking through and just plucking the fruit from shoulder height, it flowed, and you don't know at that point in time, how can you know? You can't really conceive of the idea that it won't just feel like this the same way every time, but actually you're going to have to be carrying the heavy ladders and there's going to be more sweat involved and that kind of thing.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is the part where, some artists quit, just literally quit. And I think it's kind of funny because it just as you were saying that, I was remembering back to our previous episode where we were just talking about, those commitments and the way that people see painting. And I think new painters, when you come in, you're like, oh, I just go get this paint and it's paint. How hard can it be? How hard can painting be? How hard can abstract painting be? And then you find out like, well, actually there's a lot more to it. So I think that's there's that part after the beginning, where you're like, okay, well, painting's a little harder than I imagined. There's a lot more to it. And then as far as developing your ideas, and really what I consider adding value, to the painting, like for the market, the reason why you can start raising your prices is because you're adding value to the market in terms of not only in your skill, but your vision and your creation. And like that is what is allowing you to accelerate your price. And it also is what people are willing to pay more for, like there's a match there. And I think that in that low-hanging fruit area, those buyers they're not really caring about that as much as the higher end market does. I don't know if I explained that very well.
So we have been talking a little bit about the art process itself. And so in that analogy, the fruit is your art and what you're creating. But when you look at it as that analogy in terms of the people, these low-hanging buyers are the ones that maybe are easy to reach. And, that's when we talk about kind of big art marketplaces where there's a lot of people. It just makes sense that where there's a lot of people who are easy to reach, there's also a lot of competition. So, I don't know, you're there pulling down the low-hanging fruit, but there's also like 6 other artists in the same orchard.
60, you mean?
Pulling 600. Pulling at the same fruit, and you're like, oh, I got to get to them first. And now, that's when we talked about it gets more competitive in terms of price and that kind of thing. I can run this analogy all day, I tell you.
Yes.
Because we can also think, when that particular market is exhausted, when, you don't have buyers there, I think that's when we also talked about a couple of episodes ago, like when we get that urge to jump ship. So it can start to feel a bit difficult. You can go, oh, okay, there's like 6,000 artists all in the same orchard. It's getting really crowded. We've taken out the lower levels. I don't know what to do here. So you can think that it's a good idea to jump ship and go to the orchard next door and go to a fresh batch of easy to get buyers. And that's, we've kind of come at this at different angles and a number of times of how that can play out.
I think that's where, again, in the lower art market, you might see people trying a different trend. They're like, oh, I'm going to try this style now. And so to me, it's like if anyone knows me personally, they know I'm pretty simple. I don't wear a lot of sequins, but it's like me going and buying a sequins dress and trying it on. And I'm like, I think I'm going to wear sequins now for the week. Like, I think that the challenge there is like, does it feel in integrity with who you really are, And if it does, well, great. But I know for me, I wouldn't feel an integrity if I were just jump to ship next door. Like, okay, now I'm gonna do landscapes. Now I'm gonna do flower. Like, it's just that thing of.
I just had a thought that like you could jump next door to like the mango orchard, but actually you don't even like mangoes. So that was the next one across. That's what you went for.
It's funny. You don't like mangoes.
So that's why.
Exactly. So I think you have to be careful. And again, I'm not saying like personally, there's a ton of people who were great at landscape and it's completely aligned with who they are. They're completely aligned with florals. So I'm not saying one is worse or better than the other. I'm just saying for me, that wouldn't align with me and the holistic 20-year vision of my career to do that. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not so compelled. Like, the landscape isn't the thing that pulls me in as much, you know, and so for me, if I did that, it would be more of a superficial reason. And I think that's kind of what the heart of, and again, I always feel like I'm saying things that, you know, could offend people. So I say this with a disclaimer, but also at the same time, like, it is what it is. I'm going to say it the way it is. I think people can make superficial decisions. And I think as artists, we have to really be aware of the art we're making. You know, is this really a real thing for me as far as the connection I have to it? Or am I making a decision based on something superficial that doesn't actually mean anything to me? Because again, I think that the low-hanging fruit analogy, like the superficialness, like it just isn't sustainable. And it's not that, you know, I don't love beautiful things that happen to also be superficial. Like, I love luxury, beautiful things. Like, I'm a sucker for that as well. But for me to do things as an artist, I have to really make sustainable long-term decisions, not superficial short decisions.
Yeah. So what we're saying in that analogy, I guess, is that when you're connected to something and that's kind of where you want to be and where you want to put your time and, you know, your mental space and your emotional space and your energy, so you're on that path, but there's only so much low-hanging fruit. But it's actually kind of built in that you want to get the ladders. You want to go deeper. Like, that's inherent in the process. So you don't want to keep like just be on the ground level.
Yes.
So you want to put in that effort and the point and how that meshes up then with what you have been talking about in the market is that, okay, you're moving up the tree, and hopefully what you're doing with your marketing and your strategy side of things, your business side of things, is you're lining that up now with fewer buyers, but people who are more discerning about that extra effort. You know, okay, now I'm gonna bang this analogy all the way to the end. Now we're getting into like the people who are willing to go to that organic section and buy the fruit that's like being handpicked versus you know, chopped off by a machine. You know, I know that in Japan there are certain types of melons and fruit that are just single packaged and, you know, will sell for $100 because they're like the real specialty fruit. That's the kind of fruit we're talking about when you put in the effort and you've really not just wandering through hacking off whatever's on the bottom.
Yeah, 100%. That's such a great analogy because it really is. And not only that, but if you think about really what an orchard is, and an orchard is a whole field of fruitful trees. And so if you're really investing in your orchard, you know, one that you can really plant your roots in, you know, and again, we love to have these analogies, but it's going to produce fruit all the way to the top. And again, I think in the previous episode, we were talking about how making choices, sometimes we have to make choices that seem like they're not fruitful, you know, in that moment. And that moment could last for a year or two. I mean, and I'm just being completely honest with my own experience. Like, when I was really digging into what I really wanted to do as, you know, truly as my most authentic work, that really did not look like a bunch of easy, low-hanging fruit at the moment. You know, it was literally planting roots and, you know, digging a foundation and just taking steps that weren't visible signs of even having any fruit, to be honest. Like, there was no fruit.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like little buds here and there, but it wasn't anything that I could see that always gave me confidence. And I think that's where the road gets a little bit slippery, because we're like, well, where's that easy, low-hanging fruit? Where's that quick win?
Yep. And I'm not a wine drinker, but I'm pretty sure that, in the development of vineyards, that there is that, like the really young vineyards don't produce the best wine, but the people who are starting those understand that. Like, they have to work through those early seasons and early harvests, and they have to put the effort in, knowing that they are investing in building something that's going to enrich with time. And to really, like, they're aiming for a quality vintage 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and they're still working that now.
Actually,
just to extend that.
Not to just have this whole episode is going to be analogies, but I love the wine analogy because if you think about it, wine is very similar in that sense of you've got your cheap wine that you can buy, that's the low hanging fruit, and it's you can get it for, I don't even know what the prices are, but pretty darn cheap, $5, $7. And then you've got all these, nicer wines that go up. And how much time have they put into the energy to make those wines, and how much fertilizer, like, I can't even imagine the amount of effort that they put into that. And the time investment, I think, in wine is such a great analogy, because those wines and, those things that take a while to brew, like, they don't necessarily give them the benefit immediately, as a wine producer. Like, they got to hang in there and wait for the right time, and then they can, reveal it and charge a lot more for that investment.
Yeah, there might be a few seasons of producing vinegar.
Right.
Because that's, that's the early fruit's just not at the standard that they want. So
as artists, we can take a lesson from that, because I think that sometimes we can feel like unless we're producing something, it's not worthy. But that's not true. I mean, look at even small businesses. Many small businesses don't even make a profit in the first few years. Like, for us as artists to think we're going to literally go to the $2 shop and get some paints and be successful, quickly is just crazy. And yet we feel bad, and we feel bad if people are like, well, how's that art thing going? And you're like, well, I just bought myself another $2,000 worth of supplies. I love it. So it's tricky.
It is tricky. And I want to flip this now. I want to turn it around a bit, because I think what we're talking about is a little bit macro, like from the big picture point of view, like developing your process over many years, understanding the market in a big way. Because what I think is really interesting is that you can also flip it around and use this idea of low-hanging fruit as kind of a way to move you forward in a smaller way, day to day in the studio. Because if you're feeling stuck, if you feel like you're at a dead end, sometimes looking in a small way for those quick wins, looking for what's most obvious, what's right in front of you, but maybe you've been overlooking, can be a really powerful way to move things along. And so that's where I'm going to be a bit of an advocate for the low-hanging fruit, because we can be overlooking that, what's right there for us to use.
100%. In fact, my studio is really based on that, like looking for those quick wins. And I think that's where, I guess, for me, what works the best, and I don't know what you found as well, Bec, but instead of kind of looking to the external world, for those quick wins, if I really just spend time to dig into my own self, those quick wins are so available, like in a literal way. And I'm always pleasantly surprised by how quickly they can reveal themselves when I'm actually opening my eyes and looking for them. And not necessarily being like, oh, well, what's over here? And what's, like kind of removing myself from my own presence and what that art experience is for me. You know what I mean?
I'm picking that up 100%. Yeah, it totally is, because we overlook, like you say, let's zoom down a little, like right down and kind of look at ourselves as an orchard in ourselves. And we can think, you can make kind of judgments. I don't have anything within, like the answers aren't within me. I need to find something else. I need to just assume that it's not within us. But like you say, slowing down, going into the studio, and like when you talk about quick wins in the studio, you know, playing in the studio and really giving attention to what's happening in the moment.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of thing?
Yeah, it's about being super present when you're in the studio. I mean, for me, if I can really immerse myself and connect on a heart level, you know, like really get in touch with, and for me, it's a visual experience, you know, so I'm definitely looking at my inspiration, I'm looking at my paintings, and I'm making connections about what the feeling is that I want to put in my painting. And through the experience of making painting, you know, sometimes there are things that look like you don't necessarily have wins, but I think that I look at it a little bit differently. I look at taking risks and failing as a win. I know that not everybody sees that way, but I think that you can really design wins to be any way that you want them to be. Like for me, if I just repeat myself, I'm not winning. I might have a beautiful painting, but that is not a win. So I guess it depends on what your, you know, what your standard of wins are and what you're looking for out of your art practice as well. I find wins to be experimental, like seeing in a new way. That's a win for me. If I can see in a new way, whether even it's a color test or, you know, testing out some new material, or like I literally am looking for those kind of wins. Yeah. And that to me is like, oh yeah, okay, that's good. I like that. Like it seems like it's not really anything like significant, but if you take, you know, 200 of those wins, and that really becomes, you know, the foundation of your art, you have a real thing. You know what I mean?
What I was thinking of connected exactly to what you said there about it. It feels like it's not very significant. I think where that kind of, when I talked about wanting to flip the view a little bit, what I see is that when you come into this kind of close micro view of the studio experience that we're talking about now, the difference is that instead of thinking that you need to get out all this paraphernalia, you know, all the ladders, and you need to have these complicated systems or external experts or kind of things in order to build up something that's show-stopping, right? To put on this big performance, that it's actually about getting really close. It's about it's about the stuff that's closest to you, that's inside, and that's the stuff, just like you say, that we're thinking, well, that's not significant enough, that's not big enough, that's not, you know, exotic enough. But it's kind of, you know, coming in to find that like it's not the exotic fruit, it's not the stuff out there, it's the really the stuff that's at home right inside you, the stuff that comes out, like you say, when you're just playing and you say, the gold is here. Yes, is what I'm getting at, I guess.
Not only that, but when you say like it doesn't look like exotic fruit, it doesn't look like exotic fruit to you because it's you, but it looks like exotic fruit to us because we're not you.
Exactly.
This is the
paradox. This is the amazingness. You take that really thing that's yours, that seems like low-hanging fruit to you, that's
and
really
ordinary,
coming naturally and ordinary. It's just like the apple in your heart kind
in
of
fact
thing.
I would say that the apple's dropped on the ground and you're not even noticing it, and it might even be rotting, and you need to pick that back up. You know what I mean?
It's not even hanging anymore. It's the fallen fruit.
It's the fallen fruit.
I think the fallen fruit and
neglected fruit.
Yeah, it's true. It's so true. And it's a real mind shift to notice that. You got to practice. You really have to practice noticing. It's so easy to keep overlooking it. Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the magic is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because if you think about it, like the irony is really that for us it feels so ordinary, and so therefore we're like, well, that certainly can't be exciting and exotic and all the stuff we're looking in that. But
no one's interested in those neglected apples. They all want the
exactly. But it's so we're so close to it, we can't see how special it is, and I think that when we can allow ourselves to just kind of bathe in it. You know what I mean? Like, we need to really soak in our essence and kind of learn to see it in a way that allows it just to bubble up so that other people can go, wow, that's actually pretty cool. I mean, I think that we need to take a little bit of time and collect that fruit that you've let go to the ground and rot, and pick it back up and look at it and cut off the pieces that you don't like anymore, and keep the core that's still there, that's really you, and that is the low-hanging fruit as an artist. And I think not only the low-hanging fruit, but like it's the foundation. It's the same stuff that you're going to plant the seeds for the new stuff. Like all the seeds of the future orchard come from these seeds, that come from that. Oh
yeah. Okay. I'm loving this. So now we're planning our next orchard from those seeds. But yet, and when you say soak in the essence, I think that is exactly the kind of work which we talked about in the last episode that takes bravery, because it is that in the tunnel. It is the time that can look, insignificant to eyes from the outside,
and
full
probably
of doubt for yourself.
Yeah, because I think as people who want to be productive human beings, I mean, who doesn't want to feel like you have a purpose or you're contributing? And when you're in this, like soaking, observing yourself, it feels like there's nothing happening, but honestly, it's the same thing as meditating. Like, meditating doesn't look like anything's happening. It doesn't. And yet it's one of the most powerful exercises you can do. Like, sitting in silence, looks like nothing, but that's the actual irony of it all, is it's the thing that actually opens up things. So I could go off on a tangent about that, but I think that things are not what they appear to be,
No.
and we have to kind of be open to them looking differently than what we think they were supposed to look like.
Exactly. And to be brave and to take that leap that you're going to feel like nothing's happening for a while.
Yes.
And it's going to take a while, and it's going to be really unnerving, because what you're investing in and committing to is yourself, and that's a lot of vulnerability. It feels easier to commit to some other external promise, someone saying, if you do this, this, and this, you'll be a great artist. Because in some ways, if you fail, then it's not you. It's them. It's them. It's whatever they taught you that didn't work out.
Yep.
This is really, as you say, going to your own roots, to going like into your own foundation and your own seeds and your own ground of yourself. It's unnerving. It's hey, welcome to being an artist.
Yes, it's very unnerving. But it's again, I look at it and I think, but the fruit that you can get for decades is unbelievable. I mean, and again, if I would have started this sort of internal journey, 10, 15 years ago, I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I wait so long to do this? Because it's just it just keeps giving and giving and giving, on so many levels.
It's the wine thing, isn't it? I'm just thinking it's the wine thing. You got to have a belief that it's going to yield the vintage wine in the end, even though the first few seasons you're just getting young grapes that might end up being vinegar. But you got to believe in what you're building.
Yeah. And I think the part that we come unraveled in that is that we have this expectation that it's a certain way. And I'm not even sure that I've even read anywhere where it should be this way, but I think our brain is like, oh, it's going to be like this. And
who said?
Who said? Like, I don't even remember reading that. Like, where would I even come up with the way I thought it would be? So I think that readjusting our expectations is something like we're only disappointed when we're not meeting our expectations, you know? And if we're expecting to go deep into developing more of ourselves and we think it's going to happen in like a week or a month, and it's just like going to be boom, it just, I mean, it's just not like that. Life unravels the way it's supposed to. Timing is, you know, part of the equation that it just kind of unravels in its own way based on where your head is, what you put into it, how you have the resistance. Like there's so many factors to it. And I think that we have to just readjust and say, wow, hadn't counted on the resistance to my own self. Like, do you know what I mean? There's so many elements to it that we have to be flexible to and to be kind to ourselves along the way and say, you know, it might look a little bit different than we think, but I think that, the low-hanging fruit is everywhere, but the best low-hanging fruit, I think, is within ourselves because it's easy to find it again if you're looking for it.
Yes. When you find it within yourself, it becomes, and we've talked about this, it really genuinely becomes a inexhaustible source. Like you have, as I know I've been talking a lot of food. I'm not saying SAUCE, I'm saying SOURCE. So we're saying get that neglected fruit from inside. Start investing in your own wonderful orchard or vineyard, and then you start building and aiming for that higher fruit.
Right. Yes.
As you progress. Yeah.
Yes.